Okay, so I guess we're going live now. All right, so welcome everyone to the Q&A for the Midwest Video Poetry Festival for the first night. My name's Genia Daniels and I am the managing director of the festival. And tonight we have Ayeesha Jones, who is the Watershed reading director at Arts and Literature Laboratory. And then we have Angie Trudell-Vasquez, who is the Madison Poet Laureate. And they will both be leading us in some questions tonight about your work. And hopefully we'll just have a very comfortable and easy discussion and just exploring, you know, everyone's work and have a nice conversation about it. So I'll turn it over to our two co-leads, Ayeesha Jones and Angie Trudell-Vasquez.
Thank you so much. Angie, where do you want to begin?
Well, so we have several people here. I guess I'd be ready to start with Mexicans Lost in Mexico. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you wanna go first, Ayeesha?
Yeah, I found this. What did I say in my notes? It definitely obviously was like, it gave me this very charming art house feel. I love the home movie grainy effect of the images. What I said in my notes is, unlike the other video entries, this one is entirely focused on the language. And while it is image-based, its images seem to be secondary to what's going on in the video. So I'm curious about that choice to rely more on the poem itself than maybe a little less the images. And I appreciate the split screen choice that's done throughout. And I'm interested in the creation of duality that moves throughout the video and how that's important with respect to the poem as well.
Hi, this is Irit. I don't know if Nico, do you want to talk about the poem a little bit first, or?
Gosh, I was hoping you would start maybe just with your kind of thinking and interpretation, and then I'm happy to jump in with a little bit more about the poem.
Yeah, I felt that Nico's words already were so visual and gave such a feeling that I really just wanted to play around with how the words could also be part of the imagery. I feel like there's like a few different questions in there, but I think kind of allowing the viewer to really experience the words and take time with them. And, you know, we decide not to do a voiceover, but just really let the viewer take time, read it. And I think one thing that we were able to do in the video that's maybe different than if Nico read it was that we were really allowed to play with the pacing. And it felt like such a dream-like, when I read it, it just felt so dreamy, and that I think just kind of trying to stay in that world and not let anything feel like super concrete, and feel like the words are really floating around in the location of the poem versus us really getting like too much, maybe like stuck in like any particular imagery.
Yeah, and I think as we were collaborating on this and Irit was making suggestions about how we approach some of the visuals or had put together a lot of what you saw in the final version, I think I really appreciated an approach that wasn't going too literal for the imagery. I think particularly because this poem is really playing with the idea of memory and kind of like what pieces of memory we select to hold on to, and I think, yeah, that duality of sort of what exists in our memories in kind of a dreamlike state that's maybe embellished because of the other associations that we're bringing into that memory, and also the parts of it that are real and acute. So yeah, I think there's something that worked for me in Irit's interpretation in terms of yeah, just coming at it from kind of a textured place versus trying to kind of match the imagery of the poem one-to-one.
I love what you said, and I was thinking as you were talking, Irit, that the text was lost in the movie or the clip itself, which really resonated with the title. And I was really interested in your sculpture approach, because I think of poetry as sculpting language. So that was really, I thought, intriguing. And I could see the layers and the duality and the text and the music as well. But I was interested too in rotoscopy, I think, which I don't know what that means. So those were my questions for you as the filmmaker. If you could just expand on that, I'm like, oh, new word.
Well, rotoscoping we didn't use in this video, but there was, I think, another video in the festival that did use rotoscoping. I don't know what which video it is, but it's a form of animation where you record the video and then you through different methods are kind of outlining and kind of removing the video, and you have the line drawings left over, and it creates this animation. But what we did in the video was, I mean, which was kind of nice of using memory and this video being in collaboration, because the video was my family's home videos. And they were, you know, they weren't even, you know, they were like from my dad's childhood of like some vacations in Florida or something. So it was kind of nice to kind of mesh. So in this way of this collaboration, kind of mesh and layer these memories that I inherited and these memories that Nico had, and kind of work with them together. So I feel like even though the video is very much focused on Nico's words, I feel like in the spirit of collaboration, there was the materials of our lives were collaborating. And so I feel like and I don't know if you bring up the sculpture, I do have a sculpture background. And I think that for me, it's like thinking about the materials and like what materials mean. I think both of you spoke about the graininess of the video. And I think like that gives us this nostalgic feeling. And so it already takes us somewhere else other than the here. So for me, when I'm using video, I'm really thinking about like it both as a material and the different ways that those materials are loaded with information and how that can help. And I feel like the sound was also kind of another piece that was layered and like became kind of allows it to be a little bit of a more three-dimensional space, how it expands into our space rather than it being kind of the two-dimensional of the page.
And I wanted to say, Nico, such strong poetics. Like, I think of poetry as a visual art form. And so I really enjoyed seeing your lines. And the one that struck me was only the symmetry of a blue wall juxtaposed with the image. And I'm like, oh, that got me. So I don't know, maybe talk a little bit about your inspiration for this poem. You know, it's an intriguing title.
Yeah. Well, I do think I write a lot by collage. And so I think a lot of my process is kind of collecting details, you know, and just kind of holding on to them, or writing them down, or having, you know, poems that I've started that I haven't finished. And so this piece was actually created just partly through a writing prompt where I was just kind of like generating lines, and then as I was looking at them kind of started to see like, oh, I think there's like a narrative that could be shaped here that, you know, that I was associating with this this particular moment of a trip that I took to Mexico City. And then I started, I think, pulling some of the other lines and materials from other sources that I had. And yeah, and I guess I'll say too, I think I'm a trans poet, I find myself drawn, I think, to talking about that experience, not so much through the lens of gender, but through the lens of encounter and kind of and experience and sort of what happens in these sort of episodic moments where, you know, kind of identity is colliding with these other things in your environment. And so I think this particular poem, you know, while it doesn't speak to that part of my identity directly, I think is part of a bigger body of work that is kind of interested in this idea of what's real and what's not, or, you know, we can sort of capture something or say it's real in the ways that we need it to be real, as an expression of ourselves and how we're experiencing the world. And so I think that this is, this particular poem, I think is kind of claiming the right to do that in some ways, to look back on a memory and say, like, this is how I experienced it, and this is how I'm going to remember it, even though the poem itself, I think, kind of indicates that that memory is not, isn't exact, you know, that there's things in there that I've made up in one way or the other.
So I just wanted to, there's a couple questions that we are fielding from some audience members, and maybe we already covered this, but someone asked, said that they'd love to hear from the video poetry makers talk about their process, especially how they chose what visuals and text to pair and which came first. So I think we already covered that with both of you, but maybe as we move forward, we can ask that of others. So, all right.
Oh, one thing I didn't get to ask for your video, Irit. Am I saying it right? I wanted to ask about the way sound is working throughout the short. One thing I really loved was how lush and rich the nature of sound was throughout the video, which reminded me very much of the Midwest. I'm from the West Coast and also from the East Coast, and I had been away from nature for so long. And it's impossible for me to think about the Midwest without also thinking about how lush the tapestry is. So I'm curious about the ways in which sound weaves throughout the video as much as the poems themselves and the choices of your images.
Yeah, thanks for noticing. Luckily, you know, because of this class, I mean, we decided to choose this poem for the collaboration, and then it happened. I'm in a grad program at through Image Text Ithaca College, and we were taking a trip to Mexico City. So I had the opportunity of just doing some field recordings there while, you know, so as I was just walking around, I just picked up different sounds, not having any particular vision, but just knowing that, like, we were going to need, like, especially without a narration, that we would need some sound to kind of fully create the space. And I really tried to make, similarly to the feeling of Nico's words, where they're kind of coming in and out and we're kind of shifting through spaces, and it's not like really clear where we're entering and leaving, to kind of to have the sound feel similarly, where it's kind of just kind of like like it passes by us, you know, and it's almost that, like, you know, when like a car just kind of passes by and we kind of catch a little bit of whatever music is playing from there. So yeah, so I was very lucky to get the audio from Mexico City, but kind of still leave it where it's not so particular to any one, where you're listening to it for information, but it's kind of adding to the atmosphere.
Sorry, I was muted there for a second. I was wondering if we could actually go introduce each piece and say your names and like what is your piece of work, that way so our audience can kind of see who's here, if that's okay. Can we start with Hailey?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hello, my name is Hailey Miller. I'm from Colorado. I directed the piece called Grindhouse, which was written and performed by Ruby Albright, also from Colorado.
Great. Thank you. And IS and Angie, do you have any questions for Hailey?
Yeah, I do. Let me find my notes. What an interesting. There are so many interesting choices that are made, I guess, in terms of direction. It feels as though the images that play throughout, it's like a single standing image of the person reciting the poem, right? But then as the video plays out, there's this sort of distortion of the image. We see ankhs, we see references to ancient Egypt. There are some other things that are going on too. So I'm very fascinated with the way spirituality is working throughout the video. I'm very fascinated with how color and internal struggle are also reoccurring motifs. I'm also fascinated with the significance of the moon, right? And how it lingers in the background. The way in which layers are used throughout the video, I find very fascinating and interesting.
Yeah, so well, first of all, that piece was recited live. Ruby did that live. We set up a microphone in my garage for her and just blacked out the garage. And she recited that live, and I just went in and mixed it as I edited the video. The choice to use black backdrop specifically, throughout the whole thing, just the power of blackness, the beauty of blackness that we perceive. Being Black females, I'm non-gendered female. Ruby is a woman. It, like you said, it does go pretty nicely into ancestral symbolism, our African symbolism. And when I first heard the piece by Ruby and suggested, we should make a video for this. This is a really beautiful piece. The way I interpreted it was almost like an awakening or a reawakening of something ancient inside of her. And something, like she said in the beginning, started out as recreational vibes, but was pressing on her that it needed to awaken. And I feel like we've been in some kind of paradigm shift for a long time now, where people are awakening or reawakening and seeming to try to come back to love, especially with the prevalence of hate in the world. Color-wise, we're both really into auras, color auras. That would fall into spectrums too. It's just there's so much symbolism. I mean, we could talk about a lot of things, because both of us are very fluid people. Gender-wise, we're we're fluid. Spiritually, both raised and very religious, with very religious backgrounds, but have grown to become very spiritual beings. I don't know what else to say about it other than I would hope that everyone feels at least somewhat of the awakening that she spoke to in that piece.
Can you hear me okay? It was like Ruby was a star illuminated, and all this power was coming up out of her, and it just drew you in, and it was such a singular, powerful shot, and I was really amazed. And I know, she's not here right now, but just convey what a powerful piece. And I think you're right. We are in a paradigm shift. We have been, and the ancestors are pulling for us. So thank you. That was just beautiful. And I'm curious, do you do other poets? I mean, is this something you do regularly?
Well, I don't. Ruby is a really good friend of mine. I don't know if you can see it in the background here, my duty uniform. I'm on duty in the Army. right now in an undisclosed location. so I don't get to, do this kind of stuff often. But when I do, when I'm home and I get the chance to hang out with my friends and do some creative things, I jump at the chance. So hopefully y'all hope for me in the future. I'll have more opportunities to do stuff like this. And I will convey to Ruby what you said is beautiful. She's like a star. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was one of the more powerful pieces that we came across when we were editing or going through the submissions. So it was definitely something that stood out to us when all of us were reviewing the submission. So thank you. And it was a real pleasure to watch your work, and I think you should do more of it, frankly. So it's good. All right. Let's see here. Ayeesha, can you hear us?
Yes, loud and clear. Hi.
Can you just tell us who you are, where you're from, and tell us the title of your work, and maybe say a sentence or two about it if you want?
Yeah, of course. My name is Ayeesha Raees. I was born and bred in Pakistan till I was 18. Then I came to America for college and ended up staying here. I think this year, next year is going to be my 7th year in the East Coast mostly. I identify myself as a hybrid poet, mostly because I don't think all poetry belongs on the page. So I am always interested in finding other spaces where a single poem can be expressed better. So the film that I wrote and made is called, I have to read it because it's a very long title, so I don't even remember it myself. It's called A Manual, a Memoir for Learning or Knowing about a Tentative or Fleeting Ticking Thought Machine or Being. For short, I just call it a manual. So.
Great. Yeah, that's what we referred to it when we were referencing it in our discussions. We just said a manual. All right. Angie or IS, do you have any questions for Ayeesha?
If you wanted to start first, Angie, or I could go.
Go right ahead. Sometimes I talk too much, so.
Oh, yeah. I don't think you talk too much personally. I'm curious about if the duck had a larger significance. I like a lot of different larger questions. But I think my initial question is, did the duck have a larger significance that someone may have missed? And is there a specific significance in naming the duck Hagrid?
Definitely, I feel like in regards to the growing up in constant movement and traveling, what does like a kid, like I was in 3rd, 4th grade when I got Hagrid as a pet. So when I was making the film, I was in a really interesting, like very small liberal arts college, white majority space. And I was always thinking about the unconventionalities I had, even in my work, worse in my being, and always comparing it in a more personal space, not just political. And I was thinking about like growing up and how I wanted a pet. And the first, like I had on my parents would just give me like the choices of having the most weirdest and funniest pets. But the most funniest pet was like getting a duck. And I've never known anybody personally who has a pet duck. But my parents just like took us to like the pet store, and they were like, okay, you can get a duck if you want. And I was like, sure. So like the duck we ended up getting had a limp. And I felt like as somebody who was reading a lot at that time and feeling my kind of like isolation in that sort of way, it just resonated with how a pet can fill a fantasy of sorts with Harry Potter and like all the children storybooks that I was reading. Well, I don't know if Harry Potter classifies like children, but of sorts. And I think that significance in the more larger piece, I feel like, is just like how unconventionality of growing up and being is both has intimacy regardless of it being considered normal in a society, either political or personal. And then how I was trying to think that I was kind of like trying to reflect. The whole piece is sort of like both kind of a memoir, right? And both just a reflection of how growing up from in small in spaces and then being in a current space and how it can be connected, and mostly the themes of like kind of isolation and intimacy and displacement, and how those kind of experiences have been made more survivable or livable or just more memorable just for with presence of objects or stories or narratives. And in this regards, Hagrid, my duck, who when we moved again, we had to kind of let go of because, you know, houses change, gardens and grounds and spaces change. So what does it mean to like have a pet and then having to let go of that pet after, for especially for a child's growing up or a child's perspective. So in that way, I feel like that significance was in that way kind of heavy with everything that was going on in the whole piece.
I have a question, well, not me personally, but one of the audience members
Of course.
has asked, they'd love to know about your choice of using an automated voice.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. I think that was definitely like a very intended choice. And I think that mostly came because as a reader, like I feel like every poem has a place. Sometimes a poem, when you read it, it works that way. Sometimes if someone else reads it, it works that way. And I feel like with this poem, I was really thinking about I think censorship, but not only in regards to like hiding your own self, so your identity is more amiable and acceptable to whoever is consuming it. And I think in the beginning, in the introduction, it says like, please ignore my accent, this is how it is. And it's interesting to me how a more automatic voice is more accepted in regards to like both like identity and like race and like political marginalization, in comparison to like maybe my own identity as a Pakistani hybrid, weird American, not really American person living or growing up here in my like 18 to, I don't know, I'm 26 now. So like having that kind of experience of like growing up in this landscape where I was kind of like constantly poked for my accent or my identity, but we never really question or other or marginalize automated voices like Siri or Alexis. They're actually more celebrated. So I felt like this would be a very good way to convey what I was trying to convey in regards to just living and letting be, and like an instruction of just survival of sorts. So that I think it worked really well with the video too in the end. I kind of like tampered with like my own voice and asking another like American friend who had a very like American accent to like record as well. And I felt like the more automated voice just worked really well with the pieces. That's how I felt.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course, my pleasure.
I so thought it was just lovely. It's stunning, just really stunning. And I thought the kicky music, I had a question because it was a serious subject. I got, you know, the being disrupted and a little bit of the disconnectedness, and I totally understand. But and then you would throw in this kicky music, you know, like, well, it's going to the dance party. And so if you could just talk a little bit how you did the juxtaposition of the text and the image and the music, just a little bit more.
Yeah, of course. So most of the videos and animations of sort you are seeing most of them are archival footage or found footage. And I was really like mindful of like not using something from the internet that did not belong to me. Like it had like rights, like archival stuff, and it gave a more of a good idea for, you know, like censorship and archives and like digging from the past to the present. Some of the footage is shot, like the girl in the silhouette was me, like tampering with like a green screen and stuff. So I feel like there are not really like a lot of traditional like shot footage, I guess, like with video, I suppose, or film. I don't know how to say it, but those were, I felt like I just enjoy editing more and like bringing in different like objects and elements together. And the sound was definitely, I feel like I started making this piece when this is actually my, in my undergraduate, my thesis film in video poetry, which I concentrated on. And like some of it, so I felt like it kind of depicted my own like senior college youth with like the more like bright funds of sorts. But I think the juxtaposition of it, I definitely wanted it like on the surface, a normal college experience is supposed to be fun and youthful and full of memories like that are good, like basically, and with friendship and stuff. But most of my college experience and memories and like time spent was kind of like huddled with other international students trying to figure out our placement in the American landscape. And it wasn't easy because like, you know, when Trump came into power and the Muslim ban came into effect, all the international students were put in this huge room, and we had a like kind of like a liability discussion about like our safety was in our own hands and our school would not really be responsible for us. So it was just interesting how like our good parts were celebrated, but like when we needed help or when we were in danger of sorts, we were kind of on our own. And I think like the sound in that way, I feel like it's interesting because student films kind of always get like such an interesting rap in the industry. But I feel like when you're in like such a bubble of sorts, student films are kind of like very carefully made in order to appease a direct audience, and we can't really do much. And this was my thesis film. It was being judged by my committee, and like if I really did offend somebody, there was a lot of censorship that I wanted to say all these like angry things, but I couldn't obviously say it so directly. So I had to find a way through art and literature to make my point in some way and also make it more enjoyable. So I think in that way, the music choices and the dance choices were in contrast of like the bigger themes of just neglect or displacement and like the political fear that we were all having when all of that was happening and when we were graduating, like me and my international student community.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So I'm just checking to see if we have any more questions here. Nope, it looks like.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I appreciate that when you were talking, I was listening to you talk, the word isolation kept coming up. But I think it's really, if I were to use a single word for the entire film, I think isolation is really accurate. But there are textures to the isolation, right? There's a way in which there's a voice that moves throughout the video poem that seems very deeply internal. And there's a way in which the voice moves through a childhood and uses images, cutout images, text, things like that, radio, TV, and other things. I'm curious about the artifacts in your childhood that helped frame this video project into what it became, especially with what we know now about your unique relationship to America, and how isolation coincides with all that.
So I definitely had a pretty unconventional childhood because my father was in the military and I'm an Army kid. So I moved every 2 to 3 years. So my isolation in that way is kind of like loneliness and being alone and having to start over every 2, 3 years, even as a child. And then moving to another country, I felt like I had all these like experiences from my childhood that I can just adapt and it will be okay, but it wasn't like that at all. And I do believe, like, I said the word isolation a lot because I've given it a great thought that how isolation is actually an act of an external society against you. So the othering that happens is like, that's why you are feeling isolated, because but lonely and being alone is like different emotional and physical states. But isolation, I feel like, is a more violent action that is happening if you're in a more like in a society. And I felt that way because my liberal arts club is just 600 kids. So I felt that I was in this weird social experiment. So the connection of isolation from childhood, from a personal space where the political wasn't really apparent to me, especially because in Pakistan, I look like everybody else, and like race is not an issue, maybe class is an issue and religion is an issue. Like, though there are like other divisions of marginalization, but not really race. But then the reason I put my childhood and everything in there in comparison to my present life and living in America was kind of like trying to understand if my isolation was an act I was doing to myself, or was an act that my society was doing it. And I think that already shows like sometimes marginalized individuals and like in tight bubbles of societies, like a school setting or any kind of institution, like are made to question the reality of something and like what is actually true and what is not true, and trying to take the burden of fixing us, because the first thought is oh, maybe it's us that's the problem. So so that definitely were like themes that were coming in and out and in and out in regards to me trying to figure it out. And the last piece, that's why it's kind of like ends with the idea that maybe whatever personally we are feeling in like whatever digressions and sadness or othering we are feeling, or the violence we are feeling, are probably was stimulated from the societies we are living in, because it's not like it just came to us, something triggered it. So I think that was what I in the end to myself arrived at with the last part 4.
Thank you for your answer.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for your questions. No, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry, I was. Forget about that sometimes. All right, let's move on. Thank you so much, Ayeesha. That was really wonderful to hear about your work and your experiences around that. Polina, are you there? Making sure you can hear us.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, how are
Can
you?
you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah. So can you tell us your name and the piece of work that you submitted for the festival, and where you are currently?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Polina. I live in St. Petersburg in Russia. And my artwork is Depleted Reality. It's a collage work made in the technique of cutout animation. And it's about personal crisis and research of inner self and some peculiar conditions of mind, I would say. That's it.
Great. One question really quickly. What time is it there?
Oh, it's almost 6 a.m.
Well, we really appreciate you being here. That sounds rough.
I'm really happy to be here with you, and thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. We really enjoyed your work, and we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Angie and IS, do you have any questions for Polina?
I'll go first this time. I thought it was lovely, and I'm so glad you're up so early. I just, the multiple voices, and it was jarring and lovely at the same time, and I wasn't sure what to feel. And you spoke a little bit about your inspirations, but can you go a little bit more about that? And I think this is winning another festival, right? Am I correct?
Yes. Well, for the inspirations, I don't know really. I think I was inspired by my own experience and by rethinking of my life and my artwork. Because all my works consist of like compilations of my previous works. So I always remake things that I did before. I think that's it.
Well, no, thank you. No, and that's really interesting that you said that you're kind of like recycling and you keep reusing things. And I feel like in poetry, I keep revisiting the same themes, like I'm writing the same poem. So I do understand that, and having yourself as inspiration, like who do we know best but ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. No, it was really stunning. So thank you and congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Yeah, congratulations again on being able to place this your short in different festivals. That's a big deal. So the questions I had, so I watched this several times and I'm like, where am I? This is I was trying to figure out where I was in the world, and it was jarring, like Angie said. It was also dissonant and frightening and strange. There's so many choices that were made in here I'm interested in. I'm interested in the significance of the bugs, which, if I'm remembering correctly from the description, they're meant to be symbolic of bugs of the mind. So I'm curious about that. I'm curious about the little girl who moves throughout the film as well. Whether or not she was meant to be you or meant to be a larger symbol or something like that. But I think also what's the most fascinating symbol for me was towards the end of the short, with the three silhouettes of women cut out. And as the video continues going, one of them, if I'm remembering in the middle, has a deer head at one point. So I'm curious about if there's a significance in it specifically being three women, the choice in the deer head, as well as the larger symbolism of the young girl and the bug and how they all work together. Because if I'm also remembering, there's a part in the middle maybe where she was going into the woods to look for bugs, if I'm understanding this correctly. So yeah, there were a lot of just very fascinating choices that were made for really great storytelling.
Well, for the bugs, it's actually a metaphor with computer bugs. I don't really know how to explain it, sorry, but it's like it's a game of words, I don't know. I'm afraid that I would disappoint you, but there's no actually some bigger symbolism. It's just like images where everyone can find some senses and I don't know.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you. I mean, what you've been able to answer has been incredible. Congratulations on your piece.
Yeah, thanks.
I would just like to add, Polina, that a friend of mine just texted me and said, Polina's was my favorite piece in the whole night. So that was, I just like to share that kind of information. So I was like, well, we happen to be talking with her right now, so that's great. So yeah, I think the visual aspect of your work was really bold. And are you a visual artist also?
Yes, yes, I am.
Okay. And is this your first foray into audio or video work, or is this something that you do often with your visual work? Is video?
I tried to experiment with animation before, but actually it's my first finished work, I would say, in this field. So I'm really happy that you have selected it.
Yeah, yeah, it was very interesting to watch, and it was fun animation, and like I think everything, the alternating voices like we were talking about earlier, really struck me also. It kind of jars you into different places, which I feel like it sort of made me uncomfortable, but I liked it. You know, I was like, what's going on here? But I was like, oh, it just made me excited about what was coming next. So I appreciated that, that sort of, that change happening throughout. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. Yeah. Let's see. And I think, do we have any more questions overall for Polina? Let's see, who else?
Hey, Polina, if this was your first and you've done so well, I hope you continue.
I will. Thank you.
Really? I will just add that my friend who loved your piece texted me again and says that that she loved the pace of it, and it was, the pace of the work was really inspiring for them. So
I'm very happy to hear that.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. I think that we covered everybody. There's at least one person that unfortunately didn't join us for whatever reason, but you know.
Can I say my part about Papaya? Because this was my favorite short. I don't know if we're allowed to have a favorite, but this was my favorite.
Go ahead.
I just love the choices. I think I love this short for the same reason why I love poems, right? I think a good poem is vulnerable and allows its readers, or its viewers rather, to have a window into an intimate space in life, right? Something that you just could not see unless you were in an enclosed and carefully intimate space. And I also love the choices and the trust that the director put in us, the audience, to follow the narrative without language, right? Whatever is language is physical in the body, right? We have this I'm assuming they're a trans femme person, but you know they're very masculine presenting, and they put on lipstick, and there's this beautiful way in which they then transform into feminine clothes. And I love this sort of queering of the body, how they discover themselves in this intimate space. And I wish they had come because I had so many questions. I wanted to know about the car. I wanted to know about the symbolism of it. Is it about communication or intimacy, or about transformation? I'm curious about the gender fluidity throughout. I just love the title also. The subversion that happens in here, it's subtle and it's so smartly done. And I loved Papaya a lot. It was so well done.
I agree with you, IS. That was one of that was one that was really powerful, I thought, and in such a short time too. Like it really did a lot in a short period of time. And even though there's not an actual poem associated with it, it's very poetic in nature. The turns are very poetic, and it was beautiful. The music is beautiful. Like I loved it also. So I agree with you that I wish that the filmmaker was here to talk to us more about that.
I have to say, me too, Papaya. It drew me in, the dancing, the open music. There was a theme of dance throughout. I really loved that. I was dancing as I watched it because I sit so long for work. I thought it was just lovely music throughout, and the gender fluidity. I felt like sometimes I thought, is the person looking out the window actually looking at themselves, looking in?
I thought
Right?
Ooh.
I think that's the person looking at themselves and being not quite comfortable yet in their skin. And the end shots when they were so forlorn and they watch themselves walking away, like they're walking away from their self. Like there was so much in that little piece. And I agree, that was very poetic. It really put daggers in your heart, but also really made you dance, you know? And that's kind of the thing I was getting to with someone else's pieces. It's very hard to be alive right now, but yet we have these moments of joy and deep introspection that we're focused on our, like, what's going on with ourselves in context with the whole world. So I was just really appreciated all your pieces, but Papaya, I would just listen to the music.
I
Yeah.
just I so hope that it gets extended into a larger piece or a larger film, if that's possible. And I love that film for the same reason why I love poems. I love a poem in which the writer of the poem implicates themselves. They allow themselves to have as much risk in the poem as we hope that the reader of the poem will have as well, right? There's so much risk that happens in this film, and there's so much trust that happens between us, the consumer of it, and them, the performer, right? And I just, yeah, I was so impressed. I could go on and on, but I was so impressed.
No, I'm glad that you brought it up because actually I didn't want to skip over it. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. I think I still wanted to talk about it too, and I wasn't sure how to do that, but we're doing it, and that's exactly right. And I think that was a lot of the work that we saw overall. I think a lot of times poetry in general can be kind of like heavy and serious, and there was so much joy in this, even though and that just really, I loved that part of it a lot, you know, and that there was a, you know, sort of a, there's moments of brooding or kind of like sadness, but it was the part where there's like movement and joy is really helpful to see, you know, because it just gives you that, the two sides of that coin, you know, like things can be hard, but then when you really sink down into yourself, you do have that joy somewhere, right? So anyway, that's what I love about that. So thank you for bringing that up, Ayes. Well, I think that covers everything tonight for our first Q&A, and I want to thank everyone for coming. We really appreciate, you know, all your hard work in submitting to our festival. This is the first year we've done this, and we didn't really know what to expect. Obviously, initially, we had planned on this being an in-person event, and you know, the world is changing, and we can't do that right now. So I'm really glad that we were able to make this happen, and we are so happy that all of you joined us tonight for the Q&A. So
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, all of the poets, directors, visionaries. Yeah, I don't know much about, I mean, I'm not that fluent in video poetry, but I am a poet by trade as a graduate student at UW-Madison. And I know that it takes a lot of vulnerability to put yourself out there, especially work that you've been doing for years. So I just feel really grateful and honored to be here, and the trust that you all put in us to be careful and diligent when talking about your work.
right.
I'll echo that. Like, I know, you know, I'm a poet and a writer too, but crafting your work and sharing it with others is such a joy, you know, so I appreciate it. And it's also a big step in, you know, putting your heart out there, your work out there, and being vulnerable. So thank you.
Thank you to everyone, and I hope you join us tomorrow night for the second night. It'll be about an hour again, and we'll have a Q&A to follow. And make sure that everyone that you see here tonight, you know, you check out their work or their websites, because you should. And also for anyone who's watching, if you missed the initial screening, it will be posted for 48 hours after the initial screening tonight. So if you have friends or family who weren't able to watch it, they can watch it on our YouTube channel for 48 hours. So thanks to everybody for joining us tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow, hopefully.